Control? Control, this is Morgan.
Control to Morgan, control to Morgan. I'm receiving you loud and clear. Status, over.
I am now entering the bridge and request confirmation of override password and protocol.
Roger that, understood. Stand by for protocol and password transmission. Control to Morgan. Protocol as follows. Keeping it real. Password as follows. Golf. Romeo. Oscar. Oscar. Victor. Yankee. Confirm and initiate. Over.
Roger that, Control. Confirmed. Initiating now.
You have tuned in for a slick podcast. I'm here to seek the truth. Live from Scotland around the UK. The one and only Slick Podcast. Enjoy the show. Can I ask important questions? No matter how bizarre the truth might be. Tune in for Slick Podcast. Keeping it real, keeping it groovy.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or a very good day to you when and wherever you're listening from, and a very warm welcome to the show. Coming up on today's show, my guest is internationally renowned Master Dowser and Causative Diagnostician Elizabeth Brown. In addition to private clients, she works to support doctors, dentists, clinics, therapists and consultants in identifying causative factors behind illnesses, particularly cancer, ME, skin conditions, all forms of allergies and sepsis symptoms that have no orthodox labels. After living and working in New York and Washington DC, she worked for 8 years with major multinationals and blue chip companies in the City of London. Elizabeth's nomadic family background and diverse careers in media and film, interior design and international relocation have given her a broad experience of life, experiencing firsthand the debilitating effects of electromagnetic pollution in an office environment. She then co-founded and ran a successful Geopathic Stress consultancy, which rapidly received national press coverage. 30 years of interest in holistic disciplines, including studying Feng Shui, astrology, remote viewing, dowsing and nutrition, stand her in good stead. Her teachers have been as diverse as a Hopi medicine woman, 2 former presidents of the British Society of Dowsers. Her great-grandfather was a water dowser. Her book, Dowsing, The Ultimate Guide for the 21st Century, was published and immediately acclaimed as the best description of the faculty of dowsing, consciousness, healing and intuition. She was given the Bell Award by the British Society of Dowsers for achievement in notable written work. Now published in 6 languages, it has become an international bestseller. In 2014, she was honoured by a second time by the Society and awarded the Elise Floyd Cup for outstanding contributions in the field of health dowsing. With clients in over 30 countries, she travels throughout the UK and globally. Elizabeth is a trainer for the International Academy for Professional Development in Kuwait, a regular guest speaker at seminars and conferences worldwide, and runs her own workshops. Her credits include The Times, The Daily Telegraph, Daily Express, The London Paper, Natural Health Magazine, Kindred Spirit, Spirit and Destiny, Dowsing Today, BBC Local Radio, Jazz FM, Channel 4 Television. That is an impressive resume, so you can imagine my excitement when Elizabeth agreed to come onto the show and give her time from an incredibly busy schedule for an interview. I will say that I always read the books of my guests. That is what this podcast is about, really. Prior to reading Elizabeth's book, I, like most people, had heard of dowsing, and I thought I'd had a handle on the subject, but apparently not, as it turns out. After I'd read Dowsing, The Ultimate Guide for the 21st Century, I was completely entranced by its many levels and concept. This book is not just a how to dowse, rather it's a glistening gem of information. I can pretty much guarantee that you as the reader would absolutely not be disappointed. So without further delay, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Elizabeth Brown to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Simon, and thank you for your very generous words.
Okay, let's get the ball rolling on this one. Firstly, could you explain to us what dowsing is?
I can. I think that most people, when they hear the word dowsing or divining, their immediate image is an old man with a beard and a forked stick, walking along, holding it parallel to the ground and looking for water, and they'd be right. That's water dowsing. So basically, it's a means of finding out, it's a means of finding water, but dowsing can be used for so many more things than just looking for water. And we have dowsers who use dowsing to find electromagnetic fields. We have dowsers who use it to who work for the utility companies looking for gas and water and electric cables. And we have many doctors who use it for health. We have dowsers who are employed to site oil rigs and look for precious metals like gold and diamonds, and dowsers who use it for the financial market. So it basically goes on and on. But it's a means of finding out. It's a means of tapping into a source of information to find out the truth of anything.
Okay, and like any good book, your story, no doubt, has a great beginning. So could you tell me what it was that first initially brought you to learn the art of dowsing?
I was first given a pair of dowsing rods just to hold, one hot summer's Sunday afternoon on a dusty road in Kent, and it was basically two wires, what we call L rods, two wires that belonged to the son of a Kentish miner, and apparently his father had used dowsing rods down in the mines, and they gave these dowsing rods to me to hold, and they went absolutely mad, spinning around in all directions. And I thought, well, wow, but what's that? And I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what it was supposed to mean. And I was interested, but you sort of then you move on with life. And I think possibly it filtered through into my brain over another few years. But somewhere around the late 80s, I was living in America and working as an interior designer, and I went out to a client's house, and he was in and out of the house, and I was there having dinner with them also. And he took me outside and he said, "Look at this, it's fascinating." And he'd got the same sort of pair of wire L rods, and he said, "Look, I've found a source of water here." Things waving about, and he showed me where it was, and he said, I dowsed on the depth of the water source, and he said I kept getting it wrong. It was about a meter wrong, and he said I kept dowsing on it, and I was always about a meter out. And then he said it occurred to me I hadn't taken into account the measurement between my arms and the ground. And he said, "Come on, I'll show you how." And we sort of messed around outside for a while, and then he took me into the library of the house, and he said, "Come on, I'll teach you." And he handed me a pair of metal dowsing rods. They were brass dowsing rods. And he said, "Now, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to hold something in my mind, and you're going to find it." I said, "Right. Haven't a clue how that works, but let's go with it." So he said to me, I'm going to, the object I'm holding in mind was given to me by my father in 19 something or other, and it's of great sentimental value. He said, "Find it." Because I hadn't a clue what I was doing, but I just thought, let's just go with it. And the rod started to move in my hands, and I thought, oh. And as I walked across the room, they started to slowly change direction and point in a slightly different direction. So I followed the direction they were pointing, and I ended up at a bookcase on the other side of the room, and I walked towards the bookcase and they pointed to an object, and when I got to the object, these two dowsing rods crossed, and he said, right, correct, right, next one, let's do another one. And I thought, whoa, what was that? How did that happen? What did that? And we did another one and another one, and that's how I was taught to dowse. And next day he gave me 2 pairs of dowsing rods to take away and a couple of books, and I kept them, and eventually I left America. And as I was interested at that point, this time, I got back to UK and I joined the British Society of Dowsers, and then I trained formally with workshops and seminars. I was very lucky to have been trained by at least 2 presidents of the British Society of Dowsers, actually, if not 3. So that's how I started, and I did a lot of formal training before, in fact, about 10 years before I actually took the plunge and became a professional dowser. I felt it was really important to do that much work first before I launched myself out onto the world.
So picking up those dowsing rods in America, I mean, that is quite profound results. So forgive this, dowsing then, at a basic level, is that if anyone that puts the effort in and with the right technique can produce results pretty much straight away, would I be right in that assumption?
Yeah, yes and no. It varies hugely. It depends a lot on your belief system. If you give a pair of dowsing rods to a child, then yes, absolutely, that is what probably happens. You show them how to hold them, and you could do with them exactly what I did when I was taught. Because, and this is the big reason, they don't have half a lifetime of conditioning. They don't have half a lifetime of, oh, that's rubbish, or it doesn't work, or that's stupid, or you just tell them that it works, and they believe it does. And I've had, on my workshops and seminars, I've had parents come, and on the Saturday night they'll go home and they'll show their children and come back the next morning and say, I just showed my 5-year-old and they just went off dowsing everything everywhere. And there was total acceptance. But when you teach an adult to dowse, it's a little bit more complex. Some, like I did when I was handed those dowsing rods in Kent that Sunday afternoon, I didn't know what they were, but they still went spinning around, which shows that I was getting a reaction. That wasn't actually dowsing, but I was getting a reaction with the dowsing tool, which could be rods or it can be a pendulum. But I didn't know what to do with it. So when you teach an adult to dowse, sometimes the rods just don't move at all because their belief system says, well, no, this is rubbish. And so you basically shut down the body's sensory feedback. So some adults, it takes a while, and some adults just pick up a pair of dowsing rods, they start to move. But the thing is, with dowsing rods, you actually have to, or a pendulum, you have to teach it what to do. This is a yes and this is a no, or you say, show me a yes or show me a no, or show me this object or that object, or let's look for the hidden orange. So you have to really train your body, because it's not actually the dowsing rods or the pendulum that is finding things, it's the human body. The dowsing tool is just the tool. The actual dowsing instrument is the human body. It's the human body that's a receiver and transmitter, or a transceiver. And we know this for many different reasons, but because you don't actually need a dowsing tool to amplify your body's micromuscular movements. When I'm in situations where it would be inappropriate to use dowsing rods, I use rods rather than a pendulum. I use my arm, or I use my hand, or my fingers, or various parts of the body. I mean, it can be quite fun, because you can teach parts of your body. You can actually dowse with your tongue, or dowse with your blinking and your eyes, because it's just body's reaction to truth and non-truth.
This goes, having read your book, which I can thoroughly recommend. I like to read the books of all of the people that I interview. In your book, Dowsing, the Ultimate Guide for the 21st Century, you clearly state that dowsing works, and this is drawn from your experience as a professional dowser for over 20 years, and of course, from observations of the other dowsers that have had influence on you through their initial mentorship. In fact, today you're actually a master dowser. Not only that, but you also quote some very eminent, if I can say it right, characters from the world of science. Amit Goswami, put me up if I'm pronouncing these wrong, PhD, theoretical quantum physicist, and Professor Alexander Dubrov from the Russian Academy of Science, to name just two. Mm-hmm. You are clearly not coming from a just because it works direction, but in your book, you eloquently describe that the dowsing effect from a quantum level. For the benefit of those who haven't read your book yet, briefly explain that.
When I first joined a sort of community of dowsers, well, of course, everyone talks about, well, how does it work then? You know, it's usually a challenge, not a question. At that point, people were saying, oh, well, nobody really knows how it works, or, you know, oh, it's a gift from God. And sort of very vague answers like that. And I'm afraid it just wasn't good enough for me. You know, I thought, well, why don't we know how it works? Because in this day and age, we should be able to know exactly how it works. But it became very clear that it couldn't be explained through, this was the mistake everyone was making, Newtonian physics. It just can't. A lot of people would say, oh, well, you know, it's electromagnetic fields. It's the human body reacting with water or underground minerals when they're looking for them, you know, gold or tin or silver or diamonds or whatever. And it's electromagnetic fields. Well, that was fine on one level, but it simply doesn't explain. There's a process where dowsers do use what they call map dowsing, and if they're going to a very large site, for example, to find a source of water, let's say for a farm for irrigation, then they're not going to go through tromping around through 1,000 acres looking for it. What they do, they get a map and they actually dowse over the map, usually with a pendulum, sometimes rods. And they locate on the map where the water is, and then go to the site and use the map to find that spot actually on site. Well, that doesn't explain electromagnetics, just don't explain that process. Also, when you're doing information dowsing, for example, if I'm dowsing, I'm sitting in London, say, and I've got a client in Sydney, Australia, and I'm dowsing on the level of their immune system. How does that work? That can't possibly work electromagnetically, because there's no lag, there's no drop-off between what I'm doing and the information I'm getting. So there has to be some other explanation. And the more I read about what Einstein called spooky action at a distance, and I have to say, I read a lot of books to find the correlations, to come to any sort of hypothesis, let's say. What Einstein called spooky action at a distance, which is what dowsing is really, especially when you're dowsing at distance on something. This is all connected with the entanglement of particles, which is explained in quantum physics. So we're looking at entanglement, and there were so many examples of scientists and research called Dean Radin. And then Lynn McTaggart, she brought out her book called The Field, which really explains quantum physics in the most accessible terms. Absolutely brilliant book. And I suddenly realized the correlations between quantum theory and dowsing itself. Certainly when you're dowsing at a distance, and basically the field suggests that we're all living in an interconnected reality, where everything is connected, and basically what you do, you extend consciousness to access the information in the field, in the quantum field, or the A field. Erwin Laszlo, who was also a quantum theorist, wrote about this as well. But it was David Hawkins, the great spiritual teacher and psychiatrist. He was a very highly qualified psychotherapist, psychiatrist, who actually said that the individual human mind is like a computer terminal connected to a giant database. And the database is human consciousness itself, of which our own consciousness is merely an individual expression. So we have this field of consciousness, or information field, or the A field as it's called, where all information is stored and conserved and can be accessed. And I'd been trained also in remote viewing, which is when you actually can extend your own consciousness, extend your mind into a location. You view that location, you take the information you want, and then you bring your consciousness back. And basically, I was thinking, well, this is almost the same as dowsing in a way, except you're asking specific questions. And that's how this all came about. And obviously, I go into a lot more detail in the book, and all the links and all the research and all the backup and all the scientists who've said that this correlates with what they do. People like Rupert Sheldrake as well, who had always said our minds are not confined to our bodies. Our minds extend beyond the boundaries of our body, and I knew that from remote viewing. I mean, the best remote viewers, for example, in the Cold War, they could be sitting in New York. They'd either be given coordinates, or they were looking for something specific. They'd extend their consciousness, say, for example, into an office in Moscow. They could, with their consciousness, they could open a filing cabinet, take out a file and read a file, take that information, and then pull back their consciousness back to their body. So you see, that to me had a correlation with dowsing. And then I interviewed a fabulous scientist, Dr. Konstantin Korotkov from St. Petersburg University, who's, I mean, just infamous in the field of energy. And he confirmed everything that I had really deduced, and told me how they teach this and how they use it in their own science. So I believe that the dowsing works on more than one level, but I mean, and there is definitely an electromagnetic element to it, but because our brains now, was sort of more recent, they now know our brains work in accord with quantum physics, and we are accessing this field of information. I think this is the best explanation for dowsing.
So the A field, or Akashic records, as I've heard them before, the A field, keeping that in mind, you clearly explained that the ego of self and the intent, i.e. what the dowser is set upon locating, can have negative effects to the desired outcome. Could you explain why, and an example of this?
Yes, because I mean, really, dowsing is a pursuit of consciousness. I mean, we're energetic beings. We're at that ground state level. We are waveform information. Our body, there's below ground state, below the physicality of us. There is no physical substance. We're waveform information fields, and we're living in a a holographic universe, I suppose. So we are energy functioning in a world of energy. Now, it's very easy to, when you've been trained, to extend that energy and access information, but you can also block that energy. And there are many pitfalls for dowsers, especially when the ego comes in and you get overconfident. When you get overconfident, you start making mistakes, and there are pitfalls, and you don't ask the questions correctly. And for me, dowsing, the most critical thing you learn when you're dowsing is asking the right questions. There's a saying that dowsers use, rubbish in, rubbish out. If you ask a rubbish question, you'll just get rubbish back. They have to be incredibly precise when you're formulating the questions. But what we're dealing with, we're dealing with a field of consciousness, or a conscious universe, where it consists of divine intelligence. And the problem is that when many people find that they can dowse, they get terribly excited, understandably, and believe that they have extraordinary powers over and above others. And this is the biggest pitfall. This is the ego. And when you do that, when you descend into ego, you start blocking, not consciously, but unconsciously, blocking the flow of the information and blocking the flow of consciousness. So it can go horribly, horribly wrong. And especially, dowsers will always tell you that dowsing works best when there is a need. Everyone will tell you that in the dowsing community. When you're using it for something that's when you're using it for the benefit of humankind, for example, finding water for African villages. I mean, there was a group of water dowsers that used to go out, and oh my goodness, they changed the lives of villagers. There are in many areas of Africa. Or if you're health dowsing, or if you're looking for something hidden, the police, I don't know if they still do it, but they certainly used to do it, have dowsers on their payroll. And there were many dowsers who used to find lost people, or lost children, or even bodies, in fact. Now, all those really are for the benefit of humankind. But if you start saying, well, now I'm a dowser, I'm going to do the lottery, and I'm going to dowse on the lottery numbers because I want to get rich, all sorts of things can start going wrong, and you have to be prepared for that. It's a lot to do with intent. If your intent was to win the lottery because you wanted to start, for example, a home for homeless children, now it might be slightly different if you were putting money together. And there was one very interesting example in the book where a dowser I knew was asked if he would work with I think this small company, this man who wanted him to dowse on the FTSE every day, and find out what the FTSE index would come out at every morning. And obviously he was going to stand to make quite a lot of money. And the dowser actually said yes, and that went horribly wrong. Although before he committed himself, this guy took the dowser through a few questions, saying, what's the FTSE going to close out to tomorrow morning? And he dowsed on it, and he got it right. Or tomorrow night, sorry. And then what's it going to open at the following morning? And he got it right. So he did this for a few days. And this guy was confident enough to take the dowser on, but as soon as he took him on and put him on paid contract, the dowser got every single one wrong. And it was such a shock to him that his dowsing stopped working. Now, it's not always that dramatic. But if you start using dowsing for something that is not potentially for the benefit of humankind, you have to be prepared for things to go wrong. And just as a postscript on that, 3 weeks ago I had an email from a large American financial company asking me if I would dowse on financial matters for them, and I said no immediately. I wasn't even going to begin to risk doing something like that.
That's quite strange, because as you were giving that really, really interesting explanation, I was actually thinking to myself, it's probably a character flaw of mine, Elizabeth, but I wonder if I could get the lottery numbers. I'm so glad you covered that. I'm really glad. So I'm not going to try that. Absolutely not going to try that.
Look, I'm not saying it won't work, but what I am saying is I would be prepared for unexpected results.
So a box of matches can light a fire and we could roast some sausages, or it could burn somebody's hay barn down. It's not the matches,
Exactly.
it's how you use it.
Very good analogy.
So not moving forward that much, actually moving back into time now. So religious dogmatic views, say 300 years ago, men and women that did anything with divining, whether it be water divining or dowsing or looking at the future, were at best discouraged from such things. At worst, I didn't want to think about it, but burnt at the stake and horrible, horrible other things. But in your book, you clearly state there are some renowned dowsers from the church. So, two-part question. One, did I misread that? I know I didn't. Number two, has their view, and could you tell me about that, because you give a good explanation about their view, and it's really, really quite hypocritical. What are their views now on dowsing? Are you still basically in league with the devil?
Oh, that's funny. It was some think that we are, and others don't. I mean, some have changed their opinions and some haven't. And actually, I think it all comes down to their perception of what dowsing is, of what perception of what dowsing really is, rather than their perceived view. In the Roman Catholic Church, the Catechism states that all forms of divination are to be rejected. And that's pretty clear. And I couldn't, because of the whole controversy with the Catholic Church, and every time you go near a church, it's with priests, vicars, whatever, would say, no, it's the work of the devil. I'm not having that. But so I rang a former priest, or a priest, not a former priest, but a priest, a former. He was at the Vatican, and we had an exchange of emails. And he said, "Well, no, it's divination, And I said, "Well, okay, but if you have a group of dowsers going out to impoverished villages somewhere in Africa and helping them find a source of water and bring the water to the surface and having water for the whole village, thereby saving lives, surely that can't be against the church." And he said, "Well, no." And I said, in a quantum sense, it's basically dowsing or divining is just connecting to the universal consciousness. And he came back and he said, "Well, it really comes down to what you think dowsing is," and which was, incredibly vague. But I don't think it's the religion. I mean, although I've taught in many countries in the Middle East, and most of them, dowsing is a huge issue. I mean, it's a massive issue. In fact, I had a fatwa put on me in one country of the Middle East when I was actually still going out there. And I was doing a big seminar for an agent there, and with an hour to go, they shut it down and threatened if the seminar went ahead, they would also close the hotel, which was a really smarty party 5-star hotel in a city in the Middle East. And it was difficult getting answers, but it was all to do with, you can't question the power of God, etc. So it's not just the Catholic Church; it's many religions. But having said that, the Catholic Church has had some of the best dowsers, that you could ever want. And there's when you're water dowsing, there's a rule. When you're a rule, if you like, a guideline, you're looking for a source of underground water, and you find the source, and then you have to find how deep the water is. And there's a sort of a method of calculating this called the bishop's rule. And the bishop's rule is actually based on the bishop of Grenoble, who had worked out how to do this. Obviously a bishop from church. And that's the sort of the first hiccup. And there were many, many clerical men, I was going to say men and women, but men at that time, who did extraordinary things with dowsing. And there's one guy called Father Jean Jurien, who used it for health, who left thousands of cases of that he successfully solved. He was a homeopathic doctor, and he was wildly successful doing this, and that didn't seem to be an issue either. But I think the most famous of all is a guy called the Abbé Alexis Bouilly, who was very close to my heart for several reasons. But Bouilly was actually Abbé Bouilly was awarded the Légion d'honneur, which is the highest award you can get in France, highest decoration, for his services for dowsing. And from the French government, and what he did between the wars at the end of the First World War with his dowsing, although he started off as a water dowser, he was actually able to locate underground unexploded bombs, and before they were dug up, before they were brought to the surface, he was able to tell you the origin of them, whether they were French or German or British or whatever. And again, incredibly successful. And then he went on to work for the French government in mining. He used to douse for, I think it was tin and silver down south of France. And then, not content with that, he then became a health dowser and was extraordinarily famous for helping to identify causes and illnesses in people and children that came to him when he was living back in the north of France. So all these religious priests, the clerics they didn't seem to have a problem with the catechism or what the church was saying. I actually don't think it's to do with the religion. I think it's down to the person and their personal beliefs. And in fact, I have some private papers from the copies of some private papers from the Abbé Bouilly. And at the end of what he's written was that the translation, I think, was that the practice of dowsing only enhances the glory of God. So I think it's the person rather than the religion and the what the church is saying. I think it all comes down to the particular beliefs of a person.
Absolutely. I would say that the encounters you've had with the priest you were speaking to on the phone, on the emails, and also the gentlemen that put gentlemen that put the fatwa on you, completely didn't understand the point. Absolutely 100%. Because it seems to me it's if you're locating munitions that to stop people dying, that is for the common good. Dowsing your specific field, which we'll get onto a little bit later, for medical. I just say that they wouldn't get the point. Absolutely not get the point. In your work as a dowser,
again, in your book, you briefly describe, or you briefly worked in the field of building sickness, electromagnetism, and I think Feng Shui. Can you explain that, building sickness? Because where we live here, 100% really nice. I wouldn't know if the place is sick.
If you're living in a sick building, you'll soon know. And the one of the most telling things is that you feel terrible when you're in the building, and when you go away, whether it's for a day or a holiday or whatever, you feel better again, and then when you come back, you feel ill again. Okay, so that's basically a sick building, and sick buildings, it's a very broad term, can range from. I used to do a lot of work in the city of London because of the electromagnetic pollutions there, and one of the worst, I won't name names, but financial companies, household names, I worked in, they were right over the tube, and the electromagnetic fields from that was disrupting the Earth's natural magnetic grid, if you like, and it was being conducted up through steel frame building. And I mean, they had so much sickness, so much absence for sickness in that company, and also they had so much time off for illness, and they had such a high turnover of staff because they couldn't work there, and that's why they brought me in. But in the home, they can be many different reasons for sick buildings. I mean, it can be a building can be on a I'm going to say a disrupted let's say a disrupted magnetic field of the Earth. It could be underground high voltage cables being conducted along through the grid. It can be underground water, not just underground water on its own. There's not usually a problem with that unless it's conducting something, but underground water under pressure when it's again causing some fracturing in the electromagnetic field. It can be faulty appliances. It can be the building structure itself. Steel frame buildings are never particularly good to live in. I mean, you're looking at sometimes them being the equivalent of a Faraday cage. It can be what's called geopathic stress. And this is quite a controversial subject still. Geopathic stress can be caused by many different things, but the thinking has changed over the years. If you have a personal energy field that's totally in cohesion, in harmony, your home is a reflection of that. If you have an energy field, human energy field, that's fractured or disrupted, that will also be reflected in your home. So it's a very, very complex subject, and it takes someone who's very skilled and has worked for many years to understand the causes and know how to put them right.
So, at the fear of you saying, I've told you already, Simon, let me just relate a little story to you. As you know, we live in Scotland by the grace of Mr. and Mrs. God. Very grateful for that. We're not surrounded by any houses. Very grateful for that. When we travel down south, myself and my wife, I cannot handle it. Now, we've been away from the city probably 19 years. I cannot handle it. Within, I suppose, a day, 2 days, I'm weak, on the verge of angry. I hold it together. What I put it down to, being in the centre of the city, is being surrounded by microwaves, satellite dishes, routers. We only have one router here. We have no television. We have no satellite dishes. Elizabeth, am I being a conspiracy theorist, or am I picking up on something here? Because I just cannot.
I think I haven't looked into this, and I have no proof of this, but intuitively, I think there are some areas of the country that are worse than others in terms of concentration, as you say, of electromagnetic fields, of disruption of the grid generally, but also satellites as well, but also the proliferation now of masts, of telecommunication masts, police communication masts, military communication masts, and 5G masts that have gone up. And all the literature says, this is not from me, but from those professionals who know and who have worked in these fields, that this is extremely harmful to the human body, because we are bioelectric beings, and these frequencies disrupt our biochemistry. So I would go with your intuition. I mean, when you say down south, I don't know, but if you did an extreme comparison to the center of London to the wilds of a forest in Scotland, there's going to be a huge difference. Absolutely.
Let's talk a little about the work you do, your specific field of operation that has and continues to have repeated success in the diagnosis. No, you have to correct me on the diagnosis of underlying previously hidden health problems that mainstream allopathic medicine cannot locate. Underlying cause of ill health and disease. I'm going to ask you to run with this one, as the answer to my question is a huge subject and should not be boxed in with limited questions by me. Although I'll interject at times to clarify a point if I need to. Is that okay?
Absolutely okay.
Right, here's the ball. You run with it.
I hope I'm not going to get boring on this.
Never.
Okay, so I used to run with a partner, Geopathic Stress consultancy. So we used to drive all over the UK and Europe. We did work in Europe as well, looking at going to people's homes where they have problems with electromagnetic fields or geopathic stress, or some issues, underground flowing water. There were myriad issues, and I always used to follow up afterwards. I used to phone up the client and say a week later and say, well, once we'd corrected the issue or issues, and say, how are you feeling? And I used to get one of three answers. It was, oh, feel fantastic. I've slept like a log for the first time in 5 years. I'm feeling better. I have more energy. That sort of answer. Or, I think I feel a bit better. I did sleep once or twice, and I'm certainly have a bit more energy. Or third answer was, nope, don't feel any different at all. Just as tired, can't do anything. And I used to think, well, there must be a way of measuring this. There must be a way of quantifying this so we can help further. So what I used to do when I went out, started to do, is take health readings. I'd take a reading by dowsing, obviously, of their health or their immune system or their absorption of nutrients on a general basis in the body, because I knew electromagnetic pollution actually compromises the body's ability to absorb nutrition. And there were several other reasons, and I used to calibrate these when for the client when we went to the site, and then in the weeks afterwards, and some would get better and some wouldn't. Some would improve hugely, some wouldn't. And so I thought, well, what are the other factors causing this? Why would some people get better and others not? So one day I went to a woman's apartment in Notting Hill in London, and she had for some time she'd had a problem. She couldn't sleep, and she felt very, very uncomfortable in her flat. And I dowsed on this. I went there on site, working it all out, and there had been fairly recently this massive construction project. It was actually a shopping centre a mile or two from where she was. And the electromagnetic pollution was being conducted on the Earth's magnetic grid through her flat, and her bed was actually on that line. And so there were a couple of other things as well. So I sorted it all out, and then we sat in her kitchen for a coffee. And she said, "Well, did this cause my cancer then?" And I said, "What?" Because she hadn't mentioned cancer at all. And I said, "Well, I don't know." And she said, "Well, why don't you douse on it?" And I thought, wait a minute, this is getting into sort of tricky area here, because am I working within my remit here? I mean, you have to be very mindful of that when you're working. And she said, "Look, I give you permission. I trust you to do this." And so I doused on it, and it said no, it didn't cause the cancer, but it was a contributory factor to the cancer. It was actually breast cancer. And she said, "Well, what did cause my cancer?" And I sort of looked at her. She said, "No, go on. I'm fine with you. Really, I trust you." So having researched, I mean, I started researching health, my goodness, 40 years ago. And I know a lot about causative factors in health. And so I went through in my head silently, not out loud, a list of causative factors that I thought, going through, environmental factors, and then a crisis of toxicity, and a crisis of nutrition, etc. And I stopped at its toxins within the body, and chemicals, and having gone through the list in my head, the main causative factor in her cancer was hair dye. So I didn't say anything because I was a bit nervous with this sort of information, and I looked at her, and I'm sitting opposite this woman with fabulous dark glossy hair, and I thought, there's no way. I mean, that's not dyed hair, because this is the logical brain kicking in. That's not dyed hair. That's natural hair. And I said, "Look," I said, "I don't know if this is right, but I'm getting the main causative factor in your cancer was actually hair dye." And her hand flew to her mouth. She said, "Oh my God, when I was diagnosed with cancer, I was bleaching my hair directly onto the scalp on a regular basis. And when I had the diagnosis, intuitively, I gave up bleaching my hair. I just grew it out naturally." And I was at that point I was shocked, because there weren't any sort of visible pointers to this at all. And so we went through a sort of a hurriedly put through system, and there were a couple of other factors of which she had already changed in her life that were contributory factors as well. And we put something together for her to follow through with. And I went away and I had an email from her after a week or two, and she said, "You've changed my life, because knowing the causative, contributory, and trigger factors behind my cancer has empowered me more than you'll ever know, because I now feel as if I'm part of the process. I'm not some bystander where other people are taking over, and I'm doing a treatment and I don't know if it will work, and I'm feeling helpless, and I'm not in the driving seat. But I now have things I actually can work with. I've stopped using toxic and, in fact, carcinogenic chemicals. We got her electromagnetic pollution sorted out. She'd already ended a very toxic and abusive relationship, etc. And these are all causative factors in cancer, although not everyone's cancer. Everyone who I would say cancer is very individual to each person, and their particular recipe, if you like, is unique. But her life was so changed by this, and I kept in touch with her for several years, and the cancer. She's been absolutely cancer free. It was nothing. And that also, it changed my life, and I started to put together a protocol and a structure really driven by clients to identify the causative, contributory and trigger factors behind ill health or disease. Now, I really stick to what I call chronic metabolic disease, which are imbalances in the underlying balance of in the balance of the body, the underlying disruptors. And chronic metabolic disease may be obviously cancer or say autoimmune diseases or diabetes or rheumatoid arthritis or skin conditions or allergies or ME or MS or chronic fatigue syndrome, all those things. And I've now been doing that for nearly 20 years. And it's, well, I've been told it's transformed people's lives.
You have mainstream allopathic medical health professionals referring their patients to you.
Yes.
And you have clients all over the world. I mean, this is not just a little shop. And I mean, I will ask you to relate a story about, it's in your book, about when you turned up and you basically looked at a woman, she said, "Oh, what are you waiting for?" "We're waiting for the Dowser." She expected you to turn up into tie-dye and everything. But before we get into that, I can't really overstate it enough. You are a professional in your field. And like I said, you have health professionals referring their clients to you. Could you, without breaking confidentiality, could you refer another couple of, for want of a better word, a couple of examples or stories, please?
Okay, the benefits of knowing what the underlying causative factor is in any chronic health imbalance means that you can actually address the underlying factors rather than just merely managing symptoms, which is basically, I mean, I'm generalizing now, all that allopathic medicine does. It's you have a symptom, you go to a professional, and then you're given medication to address those symptoms, but it doesn't necessarily actually get to the underlying cause. And if your symptoms are being managed, then actually it really obfuscates or covers up in a way the seriousness of those underlying causes, which are basically messages to the body saying, hey, excuse me, but this needs attending to. And I think perhaps the most dramatic of all those was I was in Australia, and I was referred to a woman who wanted to see me, and she had been diagnosed with leukemia. And just trying to remember now, she was given in November, she'd been given 6 months to live. And we were already in February, March. And she came to the hotel room where I was staying, and she said, "I'd like to know the causative contributing trigger factors underneath, behind my leukemia. I want to know what caused my leukemia. I know I haven't got much longer left to live, but I need to know what the causes are for my own satisfaction." And I said, okay. So I took a few details, some of her history, and I started working with her. And very quickly, the main causative factor in her leukemia was a very high level of agrochemicals. And she said, but where are these? We were in Melbourne, by the way. She said, and where are these symptoms? Where are these agrochemicals coming from? And I dowsed, and I said, well, they're in the water supply, and they're airborne. And she just looked at me and she said, "You don't know this, but I don't live in Melbourne. I live in it's New South Wales, and I live in an area where they spray crops with planes." Okay, that would do it. Main causative factor. So there were, off the top of my head, 3 or 4 other factors or contributory factors, and one was some electromagnetic stuff. One was certainly a crisis of nutrition. Her body wasn't getting the nutrition to heal. And one was she was actually in an abusive marriage as well. Which doesn't help, because when you're under, your mental emotional state, how you think changes your body's biochemistry. And because she was in fear a lot of the time, her immune system was very low, so she was even more vulnerable. So I did her a report, and then I moved on. I think I went to Sydney, and then I came back to London, and how many weeks was it later? A few weeks later, maybe a month, I had an email from her, and she said, I took your information and I went to a clinic, and I gave them the information, and they did an analysis, and they said my body was saturated with Roundup. And I said, because bear in mind this was, coming up to 20 years ago, I said, what's Roundup? I actually didn't know what Roundup was, and then found out it was the world's most successful, biggest weed killer, basically, and with a particularly dodgy ingredient called glyphosate. I now know, of course, it's registered with the WHO as a grade, I think it's a grade 1 or 2 carcinogen. And of course, the makers of Roundup, Monsanto, have been sued now for millions, with billions more cases pending for those who have. And I think there's class action suits as well for cancer, but that's now, and this was then. She said, so the clinic detoxed me from these toxic chemicals. And she said, my bloods have normalized for the first time. Now, I mean, this was huge. And without going into all the other details and the changes she made in her life, by the time I wrote the book, which was in 2000, and published the book in 2010, Annie was still alive at that point. Sorry, the name's in the book, so it's fine. And she lived for a while after that. So having that key piece of information at least bought her at least 8 years of life, because they were able to detox her. So she went from 2 months expected life expectancy when I met her to living at least 8, if not years, if not longer, with a key piece of information. I think one of the things I advised do, I said, if you really want to get back to optimal health, you are going to have to leave. And she couldn't do it. She spent more time away from the home. I mean, you can't live in an area and stop these processes happening. The companies are too powerful, obviously. So it's that. What I do, I'm not healing, I'm not curing. I'm very, very clear about this, because there's all sorts of laws and restrictions saying what I can and can't do. But all I do is give people information for them to follow up, to help them make changes in their lives, to help them recover from this imbalance in their body.
That was an amazing recount there, and I'm really, really glad, and Annie, I'm sure, was very, very glad that she got to meet you. So on a lighter note, before I get into the Russians, on the lighter note, can we please relate that story about not dressing in tie-dye?
Not dressing in tie-dye. Oh, yes. Oh, God. Oh, yes. Yes, I was talking. That's not Russians, though.
No. Before we begin talking about the Russians,
Okay,
I
okay,
just thought
yes.
we'd begin a lighter mood. That was all.
Nice segue. um, yes, one of the things I was very as my profile started to rise a little bit in the dowsing world, I just was very, the image of the old man with the beard and the stick, and dowsing is considered so flaky. I mean, that oddball and new agey and weird and spooky, and I was very mindful of turning up looking professional, and because I'd come from 8 years working with blue chips and city companies, I was very mindful of being very smart and trying to change the image of dowsing. Trying to bring it, and that's why the book's called, The Ultimate Guide to the 21st Century. I wanted to bring it into the 21st century instead of having it, with all these hanging on things of all the old images. And also having worked in New York and Washington and lived permanently in smart black clothes, I was sort of keen to have a smart, almost uniform, if you like. And I was on the South Bank, and my then Geopathic Stress partner and I went to a property, and there was a real issue with an apartment. I'm sure it was an apartment there, I think, and a woman who'd booked us to come and sort it all out. And we got there, and there was this sort of fairly large crowd outside, and I thought, what's going on? And the woman wasn't there. She'd popped out somewhere, so we sat by the Thames and just waited. And another woman came up, and she said, "Oh, we're waiting for the Dowsers, And I said, "Really?" She said, "Yes." She said, "They're not here yet." And I and I said, "Well, actually," pointing to me and my partner, I said, "We're the Dowsers." And she physically took a step back and she said, "You're the Dowsers?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "You're the Dowsers, but you can't be. You don't look like Dowsers." And I just thought, oh God, we've got a long way to go to bring dowsing into the 21st century. We really had, because it's just plagued by, work of the devil and being flaky, and I'll just back that up with another story. I did some filming on a health program for it was either BBC 4 or Channel 4 or something like that, and I was there, and there was a woman having an analysis done on her and her health and everything, and I joined. I'd been asked to join in, and she turned to look at me and couldn't believe that I was sitting there with a pair of dowsing rods, and she said, "I'm not having someone tell me about my health with a pair of coat hangers." And I thought, oh dear, this is, again, it's the image. There was no time, and it simply wasn't appropriate to say, "No, look, the information's not coming from coat hangers. The information is coming from your energy field, your field of consciousness, your information field, the information field of your body that stores all the information about your body." And it's simply, I simply wasn't given the opportunity. But dowsing has got such a bad rap, such a bad image.
Well, the conspiracy part of me would say that she was probably told to say that, because otherwise it would be too interesting, the program. That would be the skeptical part of me. But there again, that's her loss, isn't it? I've had people on the show before, and they haven't had a good time on other TV programs because it's not interesting if you treat them decently. And to me, it would just be that. I had a woman on last week. Unfortunately, the sound was terrible. She was an alien abductee. really nice lady, and she recounted the story of being on TV, and she was given a really hard time. It's as simple as that, and because it just wasn't sensational if she hadn't have been, regardless of what her story was. And yeah, that's fine. So let's talk Russia. There is a huge difference, as far as I'm concerned, in attitude from Western perspective of scientists to that of those from, say, Russia. Alexander Dubrov. Could you explain, to name one, could you explain that day and night attitude difference between them, please?
I'll have a go. It's very interesting, but before I ever got to really doing any dowsing, I read a book which will be, I mean, seminal book. It's an extraordinary book, and it's called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, and it clearly outlined the traditions in Russia and environs, in Eastern Europe as well, of their traditions over many years and things that they just accept as normal. And one of the things was their remote viewing program, and we touched on remote viewing before, and the Russians were really excelled at this. And in fact, it was the Russians and what they were doing, and the belief that they'd invested a huge amount of money in their remote viewing program that got the CIA working on their remote viewing program and Stargate, as far as I understand. And by the way, talking about CIA, the CIA also used dowsers in conjunction with remote viewing, because say, and this is actually a story from a dowser who worked with them. Say, for example, you've got a boat coming in, and you know that there's drugs on that boat, but it's got 200 containers on it, and you've remote viewed already, and you can actually see that in one of the containers there's a whole pile of drugs, but you wouldn't necessarily know which container it was. With dowsing, you can actually dowse on which container it is, and so with the remote viewing and the dowsing, it's actually an incredibly powerful tool, and this is why the CIA used it. But the difference in attitude, well, there's two things really. The difference in attitude with the Russians is first of all, whereas most of the rest of the world seem to spend their time trying to disprove dowsing, or disprove how it works, or disprove, just saying it doesn't work. What the Russians did, they got on with it, and they put it to practical uses, and with great success, because they have in the past. I don't know if it's still the same, but used it for road engineering and building products, and in fact, I met Dr. Konstantin Korotkov, who's an extraordinary scientist with a list of qualifications long as your arm, and he was professor of computer science and biophysics at St. Petersburg University. And he's had a research career for something like 30 years and published over 200 papers, etc., etc. And he's pioneered an invention called GDV technology, which measures energy levels in biological objects. And he's also a dowser. And I interviewed him with some really, really interesting results. The interview is actually in the book. And he confirmed that they not only do they use it, but they teach it, and they maintain, as did one of Britain's greatest water dowsers, a guy called George Applegate, sunk 3,000 wells with a 99% success rate, something like that. That if you can teach it, then it's a science. And so they have in Russia, or they did, I don't know if it's changed, degree courses where you can study dowsing, and to a lot of people, it's a well-established and very very well respected occupation. And he says, from our point of view, psychic abilities can be trained and can be tested, and he's got the machinery to do it. So the Russians looked at it in a very practical way, and after their success in the remote viewing programs, it would have been another expression of psychic development, if you like. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yes, absolutely it does. So they're not wasting their times trying to disprove it. They're acknowledging it because there is doubtless so much evidence for, and they're using it and utilizing it.
So unfair probably asking this, but as your experience in the field of health and energy, personally inwards and outwardly, is vast, I'll ask you to please outline in brief our most important basics for safeguarding our health physically, mentally, and if you want to include spiritually, that's fine. And I'll just throw in, before, I've bought the book and I shall certainly be having a go at dowsing myself. Would you say that would be a tool that could help the aforementioned?
Yeah. How long have you got?
Well, it's your show. You carry on.
It's a huge subject. I mean, but with dowsing, because you can access, let's just go back a step. The body at ground state level is waveform information field. Therefore, it carries information. With dowsing, you can access that information. So you can access where the imbalances are in the body and what they are and how to address them. But the first hurdle for people to get over is actually that, and to believe in and to understand that the body does have an innate wisdom and intelligence. And the way to optimal health is to actually support that, the body and its intelligence, and to understand that we are life. We are programmed for life. We are programmed for living. We're programmed for life. And the key for optimal health is actually to support the body's wisdom and to support the body's intelligence. So how do you do that? Well, with dowsing, you can access that intelligence and you can ask. So when I'm working, I take now, after 20 years, so many more health readings and so many much more complex measurements of the body, whether there's a condition or not, because not just the causative diagnosis. I also do have a service where I do really it's like a 10,000 mile service on your car. You can come and have something to keep top the body up and really move forward. And this is for new clients and also for existing clients. That I've got clients that have been with me for many years. So we check all the vital signs, we check all the health readings. But if you're doing it yourself, in the book I do actually break it down into several areas, and one of the most invaluable things is and especially now, is to maintain a very strong immune system. And we do this in several ways, and of course the simplest of all is water. First of all, most people are dehydrated. They don't drink enough. They drink the wrong sort of water. At where we are now in the development of human consciousness and the big shifts in human consciousness we're having on Earth at the moment, is it's to drink living water, not dead water, not water that's saturated with chemicals and environmental chemicals and pharmaceutical products, all that the municipal water treatment plants don't get rid of in their treatment. So living water and enough of it, and then food. Obviously, I mean, these are just almost too obvious to say, but to eat food that is carrying life force, that is fresh, that is organic where available, or homegrown, that is not dead food, that feeds the life force of the body, that are not low vibrational carcasses that are saturated with stress hormones from abattoirs and haven't been pumped with steroids and growth hormones. So important. I mean, they say you are what you eat, and if you eat fast food, if you eat fast and cheap and easy, then if you are what you eat, what does that make you? It's so important. And things like, I mean, the Russians have taught me, never use a microwave, because microwave denatures food. And also, when you microwave food, some of the byproducts can be carcinogenic. Now, I know there's probably going to be loads of people listening who are going to say, "Oh, it's not true. It's not true." This isn't just me saying this. This is actually based on years of research from reliable sources, and having read a library of books and looked at results. I don't just do an airy-fairy dows. It's all backed up with very reliable and double-checked information and research. Then, of course, you've got the sun, and which again is very topical at the moment, vitamin D. And the best form of vitamin D, because it's vital for a strong immune system, is best form of vitamin D is the sun itself. And the body makes vitamin D in the body from the vitamin D going on the skin and using a derivative of cholesterol and some other nutrients. It's so critical. We are light beings. We are children of the sun. And it's not just the vitamin D from the sun either. I mean, people think, "Oh, it's vitamin C, vitamin D." It's only 50% of all the benefits the sun gives you will come from vitamin D. It's also actually receiving the biophotons as well, the atomic, subatomic particles that again, on a quantum level, that we're exposed to. And also, this is with going back to nutrition. It's not just enough to go out to your local cheapy chemist or vitamin shop and buy the cheapest form. It's just not. With nutrition, you get what you pay for. I mean, I know there are limits, and there are very expensive nutritional supplements that aren't necessarily any better than others. However, if you get really cheap ones, they are usually made. It's all down to the ingredients. Like buying food, you're meant to read the list of ingredients. It's the same with nutritional supplements. Read the ingredients, and if your source of vitamin D is lanolin from sheep, which about 90% of it is lanolin from sheep that has been dipped in very toxic sheep dip, that's not going to be as good or as bioavailable to the body as something from organically grown mushrooms. And you have to look at the bioavailability, not just whether this is not just the quantity of 4,000 IUs or only 1,000 IUs. It's actually how bioavailable it is to the body, and dowsing can also tell you that as well. And when I calibrate nutritional supplements and protocols or regimens for clients, I always do 2 readings for them so they can see exactly how beneficial that will be for their body. I do have beneficial on a scale of 1 to 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, and how detrimental on a scale of 1 to 10. So taking, say, vitamin C, for example, you may have a product that's just ascorbic acid, and that's it, a nice cheapy product. Well, 90% of all the nutrition in the world actually comes out of China. Most of their vitamin C is made, it's either synthesized in a laboratory and made with genetically modified corn, or fermented bacteria to produce ascorbic acid. The other side of the picture is that ascorbic acid is actually only one component out of, I can't remember if there's 7 or 8 components that make up, say, vitamin C complex, and so you're only getting one small component, as opposed to the whole food with all the cofactors. For example, if you ate a kiwi fruit, high vitamin C, you would get the vitamin C and the cofactors to make it bioavailable to the body. So you might have a vitamin C that's made from berries and fruits, and it's a whole food. It's a food source or plant source. The best nutrients are always going to come from a food or plant source. So nutrition is really complex, and dowsing will help you there. Determine exactly what you need and which products are going to be beneficial or detrimental for the body. Again, I mean, going back to your situation, electromagnetic fields, with dowsing, you can determine how beneficial your living environment is, what detrimental electromagnetic fields there are. Carrying your phone, your cell phone, mobile phone on your body is always going to disrupt the electromagnetics of the human body, and is known and well documented to cause cancerous tumors, either brain tumors, of which there have been an exponential growth with children, or tumors on various parts of the body. I mean, the number of women now who carry their phone in their bra, I mean, oh my goodness, what are they doing? Or I've got clients who sleep with their phone underneath their pillow, microwaving their brain all night, when at night your body does all its housekeeping, and it needs to be in a gentle and supportive environment as possible. And then other electromagnetic fields, where you're living, because that's such a complex subject. And I do say this in the book, I would always get a professional in. With me, even now, if there was a big problem, I would go to a dowser that specializes in that, because I'm sorry, I'm not particularly good at physics and the science and of everything that you need to know in order to ask intelligent questions and pertinent questions to get the key information.
So I'm not guessing. This is my conclusion thus far. I've got another point in a minute. I've been taking notes. I've got reams of paper all over the floor, which I need to go through. But I think one of the key things here, if we're dowsing, I mean, I've got a problem with our little Jack Russell. She's got a terrible itch problem, and I've gone through everything. Well, actually, I haven't, because I haven't found the answer. But I think even if I was going through something myself, I think the key here, going back to the ego, is honesty, isn't it? So if I was sitting here at 28 stone and I was wondering, and I smoked 20 a day, why am I getting out of breath? You need to be honest, do you not? Am I hitting the nail on the head? Yeah. Otherwise, everything is circumstantial. It's just going for the motions. It means nothing.
I actually think it's quite difficult to douse on yourself. I mean, the key thing is actually knowing the questions to ask, and I do go a certain way in the book, suggesting questions and information, but I do not, by the way, in case anyone gets the wrong impression, I do not outline the causative diagnosis protocol in the book. I didn't want to detract. I do talk about it for a short one chapter, but I didn't want to detract from the whole mission of bringing dowsing into the 21st century with what I do. I am thinking of perhaps writing a book with more information about the whole application of it for health. But it's very difficult to douse on yourself, I think. I mean, generally, I don't. Sounds awful. I don't bother with myself unless I have an issue. However, my husband, I keep his health readings every month, and we check all his vital readings every month, and we can see what's gone up and what's gone down and what's benefit, and it's a. And I can stand back enough. I can be objective enough to do that. But if you're dowsing on yourself, it's very difficult. I mean, even for a professional dowser, but for if you're just starting out, it's quite difficult. And yes, absolutely, you do have to be honest.
I think that would be a problem for me. So getting back to my other note, I've picked one off of the pile on the floor. So water that's alive. Fun fact: we've got a British filter, and it was a few years ago. I read about this Japanese scientist. Can't remember.
Yes,
right. You know that I'm talking about. So
Masaru Emoto.
I wish I had a memory like you. That would have been so impressive if I just even if I bothered to write that down. But yeah, so I put a pyramid on top of our water, a copper pyramid and crystals in there. Not to form a drumming circle and get all fuzzy about it. It's because it seems to taste better. We've got really good water here, but just any tool in the box. What do you think about that? Should I get professional help, or do you think I'm going the right way?
I don't know. I'd have to look at. I'm not. I'm very structured. I'm very picky, and I'm a perfectionist. How about that? I don't take guesses. And what I would say about that, there's the first thing would be to douse on this water here that you've treated, whatever it is to say, on a scale of 1 to 10, taking everything into consideration, how optimal is this in supporting my health? And if you get 9 out of 10, that's good. If you get 2 out of 10, you need to do something else. I mean, so many people say, oh no, our water's really good here. And then I douse on it and it's 5 out of 10 supporting their health, because they don't understand what municipal water treatment plants do to water. And then as soon as you force it into water pipes, and it loses its natural energy vortex, living water, then it is not as supportive as to health as if it could supportive to health as it could be.
That was one of the best answers of the show, because you could have said, "Oh, Simon, that's fabulous! Wow, I should do that." No, you didn't. You said, "Well, no, I need to." That's brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. So
but it might work. It might work.
But I should douse on it, like I should douse on what's irritating my dog's skin, because that's really getting under my skin. Really, really, really poor little thing. So, Elizabeth, that's us at the top of the hour, and I really, really have enjoyed this interview. If you wouldn't mind telling my listeners where they can find you, and more importantly, where they can find your book.
The book is on Amazon. It's now on 5 continents. So whatever country you're living in, there's usually an Amazon in that country that will be carrying it. It's on other outlets as well, but Amazon, I think, is probably the main one. For me, I have a website, and that's all the W's, and causativeDiagnosis.com. And if that's too much of a mouthful, you if you do a Google search, Elizabeth Brown Dowser, it usually comes up with that. and also on my website there are links to. I'm on Twitter and on Instagram as well, so there are links through to that. I think that's it.
That's perfect. I really appreciate you giving us your time today, and I hope also that you've enjoyed coming onto the show and would perhaps consider coming back sometime to talk about any upcoming books you'll have.
I have thoroughly enjoyed it. I love talking about my favourite subject. I hope it didn't get boring. And thank you so much for having me. And I'd be delighted to come back, Simon. Thank you.
And that was the Elizabeth Brown interview. I can honestly say I really enjoyed that conversation. I found Elizabeth to be absolutely enchanting with her account of the subject matter. As I've stated, I've read her book and I can't recommend it highly enough. It's one of those alright type books, the ones that make basic 101 common sense, and inwardly and sometimes outwardly you hear yourself saying, oh, right. This interview was definitely fun, interesting and most definitely informative. My apologies for again pronouncing some words wrong, such as, wait for it, eminent. Eminent. Really, I don't know why I write these words into the questions, as I'm only going to get tongue-tied, so please forgive that Simonism. You can find Elizabeth at causativedignosis.com, or as the lady said, Google Elizabeth Brown Dowsing and you will find her and links to her website also. Feel free to like and share this podcast, and if you'd be so kind, subscribe also. If you have a story to share or you just want to say hi, then drop me an email, theslkpodcast@gmail.com, or leave a comment. But either way, please keep them kind. And so my friends, it's time for me to go. It's been a great show and I hope you have enjoyed it with me. I appreciate you spending time here and I look forward to having you as my listener again. So until our next time together, be happy, take care, bye.
Slick Podcast. Keeping it real and always keeping it groovy.